The Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries will come to order. Good morning, everyone. I want to welcome members, witnesses, and our guests in the audience to today's hearing. Without objection, the chair is authorized to declare a recess of the subcommittee at any time. Under Committee Rule 4F, any oral opening statements at hearings are limited to the chair and the ranking member. I therefore ask unanimous consent that all other members' opening statements be made part of the hearing record if they are submitted in accordance with Committee Rule 3.0. Without objection, so ordered. I also ask unanimous consent that the Congressman from Colorado, Mr. Hurd, the Congressman from Florida, Mr. Donalds, and the Congressman from New York, Mr. Garbarino, be allowed to participate in today's hearing. Without objection, so ordered. We are here today to consider 4 legislative measures: H.R. 1676, the Make Swaps Efficient Act of 2025, sponsored by Representative Donalds of Florida; H.R. 3538, the Wildlife Confiscations Network Act of 2025, sponsored by Representative Garbarino of New York; H.R. 3857, the Snow Water Supply Forecast Reauthorization Act of 2025, sponsored by Representative Hurd of Colorado; and H.R. 3858, the Sport, Fish, Restoration, Recreational, Boating, Safety, and Wildlife Restoration Act of 2025, sponsored by Representative Dingell of Michigan. I now recognize myself for a 5-minute opening statement. Today, the Subcommittee on Water, Wildlife, and Fisheries will examine 4 bills. Our first bill, sponsored by Representative Hurd of Colorado, would reauthorize the Bureau of Reclamation's Snow Water Supply Forecasting Program. Mountain snowpack is one of the most important water storage reservoirs that we have in the West. Gathering data regarding our snow conditions throughout the fall, winter, and spring is critical for water supply forecasts relied upon by reservoir operators, farmers and ranchers, municipalities, and broader water management in the Western United States. The program being discussed today promotes the use of emerging technologies like LIDAR to enhance these efforts. Next, we have a bill sponsored by Representative Dingell of Michigan that would reauthorize the Sport, Fish, Restoration, and Boating Trust Fund. This trust fund supports a wide range of conservation projects and facilitates access to recreational fishing. Its funding comes from federal excise taxes on recreational fishing equipment and fuels to support projects like habitat restoration and construction of boat ramps. I'd also like to thank the co-lead on this bill, Representative Whitman, for his dedication to this issue. Third, we have a bill sponsored by Representative Garbarino from New York, which builds upon the work the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has done with private partners to take possession of and care for animals that have been confiscated during federal wildlife trafficking investigations. Lastly, we have a bill sponsored by Representative Donalds of Florida, which furthers a goal shared by both the House Republicans and the Trump administration to promote government efficiency by holding the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service accountable to review state wildlife action plans in a timely manner. Last year, the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service entered into a memorandum of understanding to simplify the review process for these plans. This bill is intended to complement that work. With that, I want to take time to thank our witnesses for being here today, and I look forward to a robust conversation. When the ranking member arrives, we will take a moment for her opening statement. We're going to go ahead and proceed with the hearing at this time. I will now introduce our first panel. As is typical with legislative hearings, the bill sponsors are recognized for 5 minutes each to discuss their bills. I now recognize Congressman Hurd for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairwoman Hageman, for holding this hearing today. I am grateful that my legislation, H.R. 3857, the Snow Water Supply Forecasting Reauthorization Act, is included in today's hearing. As we know, water is life, and in the West, we depend on an adequate snowpack. And the vast majority of our water supply comes from that snowpack. My legislation reauthorizes the Snow Water Supply Forecasting Program, which encourages the use of new technologies to monitor snow and to forecast water supply. We can say goodbye to the days of determining snowpack by hiking a mountain on foot and using a measuring stick to determine the depth of the snow. With American ingenuity and scientific advancements, we've expanded the use of remote sensing pilots, like light detection and ranging, LiDAR, as well as satellite imagery. These imagery methods can help construct 3D models, providing adequate information about snow depth and quality. We must give our water managers the necessary tools to ensure that all of our water needs are delivered. Water supply is essential to virtually every industry in the West, from ag to mining to energy to recreation. I look forward to hearing the testimony today, and I'm excited for this bill to move through the committee. With that, Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. The other members, as you can see, are not yet here for their testimony. So I'm going to go directly to the witness. I want to thank Mr. Hurd for his testimony, and as the others arrive, we will go ahead and have them provide their information. I want to now introduce our second panel, Mr. Dave Miko. Is that correct, or Miko? Miko, thank you. The Acting Deputy Director for Operations at the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Washington, D.C. Under committee rules, you must limit your oral statement to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the button on the microphone, and as you know, we use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow, and at the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red, and I will ask you to please complete your statement. I now recognize Mr. Miko for 5 minutes.
Thank you, and good morning, Chair Hageman, Ranking Member Hoyle, and members of the subcommittee. I'm Dave Miko, the Acting Deputy Director for Operations for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. And thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today to provide the service's testimony on 3 bills. H.R. 1676, the Making Swaps Efficient Act, would require the Secretary of the Interior to review and approve any state wildlife action plan or swap within 180 days of submission, or the swap would be automatically approved. States submit swaps to receive funding from the State Wildlife Grant Program, which supports their wildlife conservation efforts. When swaps are renewed, states submit them for review to a regional review team composed of service staff and neighboring state fish and wildlife agencies. The review process typically takes 6 months. During the last review cycle in 2015, most swaps were approved within this time frame. However, some reviews have required additional time to ensure statutory requirements are met. The service supports the sponsor's efforts to increase government efficiency and predictability. The President's fiscal year 2026 budget request proposes to eliminate funding for the State Wildlife Grant Program and focus on the service's partnerships with private landowners. The service will welcome the opportunity to work with the subcommittee and bill sponsor to improve efficiency and reduce burdensome conditions on our conservation partners. H.R. 3538 directs the Secretary to establish a program to assist federal wildlife law enforcement agencies with the care of confiscated animals. This program, termed the Wildlife Confiscations Network, would serve as a single point of contact for law enforcement agencies needing to find care for confiscated animals. As the lead federal agency for enforcing wildlife laws, the service is working to implement President Trump's Executive Order 13773, cracking down on wildlife trafficking by transnational criminal organizations. In 2024, the service inspected over 185,000 declared shipments valued at over $6.6 billion. That same year, the service's Office of Law Enforcement contributed to nearly 12,000 wildlife crime investigations. One challenge of our successful enforcement actions is the growing volume of seized live wildlife that need to be placed in animal care facilities. Over the last 6 years, the service has had nearly 1,200 cases involving the interdiction of nearly 73,000 live animals. The service does not have the capacity or expertise to permanently care for these animals, and we rely on partner facilities to provide care after our law enforcement personnel take possession. The service supports the goals of H.R. 3538 to create an accessible network of qualified facilities for the care of confiscated animals. However, the service is concerned that some provisions may limit our ability to secure care for animals. We would welcome the opportunity to work with the bill sponsor and the subcommittee to provide technical assistance on the legislation to improve implementation. The service supports H.R. 3858, the Sport Fish Restoration, Recreational Boating Safety, and Wildlife Restoration Act. This legislation would reauthorize the Sport Fish Restoration Fund for 5 more years and make some technical adjustments. The Sport Fish Restoration Act, also known as the Dingell-Johnson Act, is a cornerstone of America's conservation heritage. Over the past 75 years, the Sport Fish Restoration Program has provided over $12 billion to states and territories to conserve sport fish populations, improve access, and increase recreation and education opportunities for the public. The funding supports the operation of over 320 fish hatcheries, stocking more than 1 billion sport fish annually. Those hatcheries are paired with the operation and maintenance of 9,000 boating and fishing access areas and aquatic education programs for 850,000 people annually. This would not be possible without the partnerships of the Sport Fish Restoration, the Sport Fish Restoration Act is built on. The fund is supported by an excise tax paid by manufacturers on sport fishing equipment and a gas tax for small engines and motorboats. Our industry partners directly support the conservation, management, and access to the fisheries and waters they rely on. Thank you for the opportunity to testify before you today. I would be pleased to answer any questions that you may have.
Wonderful, thank you. And now, since with the some of the other members arriving, I'm going to go ahead and recognize Congresswoman Dingell for 5 minutes. I know that you were arriving as Mr. Micah was testifying, but he indicated that they support your bill. Just wanted to let you know that, and so please, go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I did read your testimony. I apologize. We've all been in a caucus meeting that went longer than any of us wanted. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for including my important bipartisan legislation today, the Sports Fishing Restoration, Recreational Boating Safety, and Wildlife Restoration Act of 2025 as part of today's hearing. I want to thank my friend and co-lead, Representative Rob Whitman, for his partnership in reauthorizing this vital program. For 75 years, the Sports Fish Restoration and Boating Trust Fund has provided critical resources for conservation. First enacted in 1950 through the Dingell-Johnson Sports Fish Restoration Act, and not my husband, by the way, the trust fund, my father-in-law. The trust fund continues to safeguard our environmental heritage and improve access to the outdoor for all Americans. This is done by a decades-old user pays, public benefits approach, which has strengthened the outdoor recreation opportunities for boaters and anglers. It has added 9,000 public access sites, maintained 320 fish hatcheries that stock nearly 1 billion fish annually, and created education programs that have introduced more than 850,000 people to fishing. The current Sport Fish Restoration and Boating Trust Fund is set to expire at the end of this fiscal year. My bill would reauthorize the program until 2030 and continue to build upon the $40 billion the program has already put towards funding the state-based conservation programs. States know best: recreational boating access and safety, aquatic resources education, and fisheries management and restoration. This bill will strengthen access to outdoor recreation opportunities for all Americans. Additionally, it will improve conservation of at-risk habitats and fund resilient efforts that will drive adaptation and mitigation in at-risk areas. This legislation also cuts taxes. I know, I wanted to see her look. The reauthorization would reduce the tax on aerated bait buckets from 10% to 3%. Currently, aerated bait buckets, when sold as a unit, are subject to a 10% excise tax. When an aerator and a bucket are sold as separate components, they're not subject to an excise tax. This proposed change would reduce the competitive disadvantage faced by manufacturers of aerated bait buckets by enabling more competitive pricing. And another important piece of this legislation is expanding domestic fuel options for boaters. This change would add an additional priority within the priority subsection of the Boating Infrastructure Grant, easier to call BIG, the BIG program, to incentivize the provisions of alternative marine fuels that provide more domestic fuel options for boaters. This legislation boasts a broad coalition of supporters, from boaters, hunters, conservationists, and industry leaders like the National Marine Manufacturers Association. I again want to thank the chair for considering this important legislation today that has an important legacy in supporting these issues in this country. And I think we should all go fishing together someday. And I encourage my colleagues to support its final passage, and I yield back.
I'm going to give the ranking member just a few moments to settle in, and then I will ask her for her 5 minutes opening statement.
So first of all, thank you very much for being here to testify. Today, we're discussing several bills that support wildlife conservation and natural resource management. Representative Dingell's H.R. 3858 would extend the successful sport fish restoration program through 2031. For the last 70 years, this program has provided steady funding to help states conserve sports fish and maintain fishing and boating opportunities. Today's bill would make sure this important program can continue. It includes improvements to support alternative marine fuels and reduce taxes on certain fishing equipment. Representative Garbarino's H.R. 3538, the Wildlife Confiscation Network Act, would create a nationwide network to improve coordination between animal care facilities and federal wildlife law enforcement when illegal wildlife are confiscated. This bill would expand a successful pilot program that has reduced burden on law enforcement while improving the quality of care for trafficked animals. Organizations in my state like the Oregon Zoo, the Oregon Coast Aquarium, are already stepping up to care for rescued wildlife and invest in anti-poaching education to prevent trafficking from ever happening. This bill would increase opportunities for wildlife specialists to care for wildlife, allowing federal law enforcement to spend more time going after criminals. This is a win-win and true government efficiency. I look forward to hearing more about it. Representative Hurd's 3857, the Snow Water Supply Forecasting Reauthorization Act, would support investments in modernized water forecasting and improve snowpack monitoring to provide the information that our Western communities need to manage water resources. Finally, Representative Donnell's H.R. 1676 would establish deadlines for approving state wildlife action plans after states reported delays of over 18 months for approvals. I agree that the Fish and Wildlife Service should process state wildlife action plans promptly and address unnecessary bureaucratic hurdles that are keeping them from doing so. However, I am concerned that as currently written, this bill could weaken oversight of how federal funds are spent on wildlife conservation. I hope this is a technical issue that we can work on in a bipartisan way to address so that we can make progress on the underlying issues identified in this bill while also preserving the accountability Congress intended in the Pittman-Robertson Act. While I welcome the opportunity to work together on these bipartisan bills, it's hard to reconcile our conversation today with the administration's budget proposal that would cut critical existing wildlife conservation programs. For instance, the president's budget seeks to eliminate the state and tribal wildlife grants, which benefit recreation and wildlife industries that are important in my district and many others across the country. The National Wildlife Refuge Fund that pays money to states, gone. Cooperative Endangered Species Fund that supports collaborative recovery for endangered species, gone. North American Wetlands Conservation, a favorite of hunting and fishing communities in my district and around the country, gone. All of us on this committee know that these aren't just budget line items. These programs represent America's conservation legacy and our commitment to leaving our future generations public lands that they can be proud of and enjoy just as we do. On top of that, this administration has fired the nonpartisan workers who make these programs so effective. That's not government efficiency. I want to be clear. I support efforts to make the government more efficient, and I'll work with anyone to make that happen. But efficiency without funding and expertise or an alternative is just elimination. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how we can all work together to strengthen America's conservation efforts. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. I want to thank the ranking member for her opening statement. We are now going to go to questions for the witness, and I'm going to begin with myself. Mr. Miko, HR 3538 directs the Secretary to establish a voluntary cooperative program in partnership with a professional accrediting zoological association with existing capacity and expertise. How many organizations are you aware of that meet that definition?
Thank you for the question. I don't have a clear answer for the exact number of organizations that meet that definition. I do know that our law enforcement officers work across the country with qualified organizations and operations that they rely on to place animals that they confiscate with organizations that have the expertise to care for these animals while those investigations are taking place.
Well, and we definitely want that, but at the same time, my understanding is that the way that this bill is currently drafted, that it actually rather constrains the ability to do so simply by the definition. It limits the number of organizations that meet the definition. And I would request that perhaps after this hearing, you would be able to get me the information as to what the number is, because I want to make sure that we have adequate resources and facilities available to be able to take and care for these animals.
If I may follow?
Yes.
We share those concerns, and I think it's important to understand the way the legislation is crafted, it's focusing on animals that are confiscated at our borders, endangered species, CITES Act violations. Our law enforcement officers are confiscating animals across the country domestically as well as along our borders. We confiscate in the last, I want to say, since about 2019, again, the testimony, 73,000 animals. Around 26,000 of those are collected at our borders or are endangered species or CITES listed species, which leaves a large number of animals that still require care and placement. We think it's very important that our law enforcement officers maintain the ability and decision authority to place animals that are part of an investigation at facilities they are comfortable with and will best suit those animals as they work through an investigation. We do know that we're collecting animals at all hours of the day and night, all days of the week, and having facilities that are accessible to us immediately allows us to get back to our law enforcement activities. It's also important, again, is to in those unique situations where we maybe confiscate large cats. We know facilities that take large cats that we can rely on to place those animals. So it's a complex
Conundrum.
Conundrum is a great word. Yep, appreciate it.
Well, what I also want to find out is what safeguards does the service have in place currently to ensure that wildlife confiscations are done to the letter of the law and that any confiscated animal is adequately cared for? What are the safeguards in place?
So we certainly follow the letter of the law when we confiscate animals. Again, working with our at the local level with those facilities that we have built relationships with, and understand that they are also law-abiding facilities and have the capacities to care for specific and unique animals, to care for those unique animals that are confiscated.
Okay, I'm going to switch gears just a little bit. Given the number of state wildlife action plans due for an update this year, and there's over 40 of them, there must have been some planning at the service in collaboration with the states to expedite the review and approval process. Can you share any examples of efficiencies the service is working to implement to make sure that you can get these swaps reviewed in a timely manner?
I appreciate the follow-up question, and we've worked with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and through the states on a guidance memo that has identified some efficiencies through some digital data entry forms that reduce errors that allow us to manage and work through that process more quickly. We work with, we provide technical assistance to states before they even start the process so they get started on the right foot. We also assure that as soon as a state submits their state wildlife action plan for review, they're able to access the funds available to them and start working on their priorities.
Wonderful. I am now going to turn. to Ms. Elfreth for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Sorry, just struggling with space constraints in this committee room. Thank you, Mr. Miko. It's good to see you. I do want to discuss a little bit, follow up based on our discussion in May, but I do want to follow up on the chair's questioning around the confiscation bill. I'm sorry I missed your testimony again. We were in caucus, but I read your testimony. I guess I'm concerned with your concerns. This is a major public policy challenge that this country is facing. Our zoos and aquariums are stepping up in major ways. I'm the first alumna of an aquarium to serve in Congress. I served proudly at the National Aquarium in Baltimore for many years. I guess I'm concerned, did you work with the sponsor of the bill in advance or since before coming here today to try to work out some of your issues with the bill or in any way provide suggestions to strengthen it?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, and I love the Baltimore Zoo. I've been there many times myself, and I've got a Christmas ornament on my tree that goes up every year from the Baltimore Zoo and Aquarium. It's a wonderful place, and they take great care of the animals there and their care. We have worked with AZA on a pilot program in Southern California for a couple of years, and we look at that pilot program as an opportunity to learn what works and what might not work, and to help us better understand moving forward how we can craft an opportunity to meet the needs, the broad needs of the wildlife that needs care across the country.
And yet you don't believe that this bill accomplishes those needs or meets those needs? I'm confused as to your opposition.
Sure. No, I believe the bill in the accredited zoos can play an important role as part of a much broader opportunity. As we define confiscated animals, again, it's limited to those on the borders that we take on the border and that we take under CITES and threatened and endangered species. We take species domestically that meet neither one of those. About a third of the animals that we confiscate meet the definition that the bill provides, which leaves another 2/3 of the animals. We take about 31 animals a day into possession. 2/3 of those also need placed and would not be captured in the bill language as it currently stands. We'd love to work to close some of those loops for us.
Okay, well, I'm very proud to be a co-sponsor of this bill, and I look forward to working with you and the lead sponsor because I always appreciate coming with solutions. So thank you. I do want to change gears into how you're actually going to implement any of the bills in front of us today. And in May, you and I discussed the fact that this administration has fired tens of thousands of federal civil servants. I represent 44,000 federal civil servants in my district. Can you give me any type of follow-up on the 400 employees at Fish and Wildlife who were fired in February? I asked you back in May. You didn't have answers then. I'm curious. I'm sure you assumed I would follow up in this hearing today. How many employees have been fired, laid off, put on administrative leave, or taken the fork-in-the-road resignation payout from Fish and Wildlife since January 20th?
I appreciate the follow-up question, and really I'm not in a position to speak on individual personnel matters. We're preparing from our last hearing, take your oversight authority very, very critically, and are working to develop a question for the record in response to your questions from our last hearing.
They're not individual personnel matters, though. I'm talking holistically across the department. So I'm not sure the next time you're going to be in front of us, but I highly, highly recommend that you come with some better facts and figures because this is not a mystery. These are public civil servants, many of whom are sitting at home being paid with taxpayer dollars on administrative leave, not doing their jobs, not serving the American people. Okay, I'm going to move on to another kind of key piece of your public service to this nation, which is your field offices. Again, Interior publicly stated its plan to close 150 field offices nationwide. When I asked you in May about the potential of those closures, you said you did not have the information available. Again, this is where our constituents can actually meet you and take advantage of the services that their taxpayers' tax dollars pay for. Can you give me any update on those field offices you intend to close?
I appreciate the follow-up question. Our staff members that are with the service are dedicated staff members.
Of course they are, yes.
They're focused on delivering outcomes, positive outcomes for the administration, for American people.
No one is questioning that.
And they continue to do that work.
But how many field offices do you plan to close and when?
I'd be happy to follow up if you.
Is there a better means than these hearings to follow up?
Would again, appreciate the opportunity to follow up with you.
Okay, then we're going to call you this afternoon and schedule a one-on-one hearing, and I invite anybody from any member of this committee to sit with us and have this conversation, or else we're going to continue to have this very public debate every time you come to this committee. With that, I yield back. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Ezell for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. As an avid hunter and fisherman my entire life, I've practiced restoration and conservation my entire life. One of the best ways a state can manage conservation using funds through the State Wildlife Action Plans, or SWAPs, as part of the Pittman-Roberts Act. SWAPs help appropriate funds to streamline projects and conservation needs on a state-by-state basis, from monitoring species to wildlife threats. SWAPs are as much needed aspect for conservation. Yet it appears that bureaucrats in Washington are once again withholding funds. The U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has taken up to 18 months to approve funds for SWAPs. As such, Mr. Donald's bill, H.R. 1676, expedites SWAPs if they are not approved within a 180-day time frame. This bill cuts bureaucratic red tape, and I fully support this much-needed legislation. Mr. Miko, SWAPs are required to be updated every 10 years, and over 40 states and territories have SWAPs due this year. You touched on this in your testimony, but can you please expand on what that revision process looks like and how many levels of service review SWAPs currently go through, and what role does the federal government play?
Thank you for your question, Congressman. And we are tracking, we believe, 47 SWAPs that are due this year, and they go through quite a rigorous process for completion. And on average, it takes about 6 months for us to complete that process. And again, it's a partnership that we've developed with AFWA in the states to make sure we provide transparency in that work. We offer, at the very beginning, technical assistance to those states whose state wildlife action plans are due to make sure they get off on the right foot. They develop those plans. Those plans are then submitted to a regional review team that is comprised of neighboring states who know that habitat and conditions best in that region of the country, as well as the Fish and Wildlife Service for review. At that point, they look at about 8 critical factors to improve efficiency within that process, to make sure that those SWAPs meet the needs and of the plans. And then there's some back and forth to make sure everything is in place before they're finally approved by the Fish and Wildlife Service.
Thank you. I believe this is the 3rd generation of SWAPs. Would you agree that these are mature, well-documented, and thorough documents? And shouldn't the review process be adopted to reflect that level of refinement?
I appreciate the follow-up, and it is a mature process, and there are always changes. You know, states want to focus and prioritize on new species or new habitats that work through the program. Again, we've worked with a guidance memo with the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies to find those efficiencies, to make sure that we can move those through the process as efficient and effective as possible, while maintaining that transparency in collaboration with the states.
Thank you, sir. Madam Chair, I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Crank for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Appreciate that, and thank you for being with us, Mr. Miko. It's important that we empower state-led wildlife management, and we let science guide those practices. Colorado Parks and Wildlife, our state management agency, does a great job of following science-based management. Despite that, radical environmentalists weren't satisfied with the Colorado Wildlife Commission's 2016 decision not to support a wolf reintroduction proposal. Instead, they funneled millions of dollars from out-of-state groups to fund ballot box biology and force a wolf reintroduction through the ballot. In reality, the communities of Boulder and Denver imposed $1 million problem on hardworking families on the western slope of Colorado. Under the 10J final rule for the gray wolf in Colorado, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service designated Colorado Parks and Wildlife as the lead agency and required an annual management report due by June 30th each year. Has Colorado Parks and Wildlife indicated to the Fish and Wildlife Service whether it will meet the June 30th deadline for the March 31st, 2024 through April 1st, 2025 reporting period?
I appreciate the question, Congressman. I've not heard anything to the contrary to that, but we're happy to follow up with you.
Great. If you would, I would appreciate that. In 2023, Colorado Parks and Wildlife captured and relocated 10 wolves from Oregon, only after Idaho, Wyoming, and Montana all refused to participate. And then in 2025, Colorado captured and relocated 15 wolves from British Columbia. What role does the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service play in overseeing endangered species relocation across state lines versus international borders?
I appreciate that follow-up, and the Fish and Wildlife Service does have a role to play both domestically and at our national borders in moving wildlife. Admittedly, I'm a fish biologist by training, and I'm not
Okay.
fully versed in ESA and some of those regulations, but I have to follow up with you in more detail if that's
Yeah.
desired.
If you wouldn't mind doing that, I'd appreciate that. And I would tell you that this decision to get these wolves into Colorado from British Columbia was done right at the end of the Biden administration. And it was almost appeared to be being done by the governor of Colorado in a very rushed way to make sure that it was done before a certain date on January 20th. So I would appreciate it if you'd kind of take a look at that and see what role Fish and Wildlife may have played and what we can do moving forward. According to the final record of decision, the ESA does not prohibit the state of Colorado from partnering with other states to capture gray wolves in states where they are not listed under the ESA and transport those wolves to Colorado for release. I understand that the Fish and Wildlife Service issued a port exception permit allowing Colorado to import these wolves from British Columbia. And my question is, this didn't require any environmental review or analysis by the Fish and Wildlife Service, is that correct?
The Fish and Wildlife Service did issue a designated port exception permit
Okay.
to Colorado Parks and Wildlife, and the permits are covered by categorical exclusion under NEPA and does not require further review.
And that permit was issued under the Biden administration, is that correct? Do you know?
I don't know the answer to that.
I believe that's correct, but okay. And then I've got just a little bit of time here. As of June 2025, 5 of the 15 wolves imported from British Columbia have died. So that's a 67% survival rate. According to the state plan, a survival rate below 70% within 6 months should trigger a translocation protocol review. Has Colorado Parks and Wildlife consulted with Fish and Wildlife on initiating a protocol review?
I appreciate the follow-up, and unfortunately, I'm unfamiliar with those details and would have to follow back up with you.
Okay. And do you know if the Fish and Wildlife Service would consider this survival rate when deciding whether to issue another port exception permit to Colorado for additional translocated wolves?
Yeah, I'm uncertain of what all is considered in those designating of those exception permits.
Okay, if you wouldn't mind, if you could get back to us on some of those questions, I would greatly appreciate it. This is really important. It was forced on Colorado by ballot box biology, as I said at the outset. We have a governor that is insistent on doing this, and in my view, sort of snuck around the federal government in a way, trying to get it at the last minute before President Trump took office. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And I now recognize the ranking member for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairs. Mr. Miko, I look forward to our one-on-one conversation, which I hope will happen very soon, about federal employees. I do want to circle back to the confiscation challenge ahead of us. I think we can all agree that this is a public policy crisis that we're entering into in terms of wildlife that is being trafficked for various reasons. I'm curious from your perspective, and perhaps you're not the one to ask, but I do believe hearings should be a back and forth, and we can have an honest conversation. I can learn things as well as you can hear our perspective. Do you think that the penalties currently in federal law are in any way inhibiting this trafficking, or any perspective from your agency would be helpful?
Yeah, I appreciate conversation on wildlife trafficking, and we are seeing an increase in wildlife trafficking. And noticing that on our borders, as we conduct those wildlife trafficking that work with the law enforcement offices, we're finding other crimes as well: human trafficking, drug trafficking, firearms trafficking, and we believe that wildlife trafficking is seen by some of these drug cartels and international crime syndicates as a low risk, high reward, and as a way to fund their other illicit activities.
Well, you hit the nail on the head, low risk, high reward. I mean, it's incredibly lucrative just from the documentaries I've been watching and from my understanding from the AZA community as well. So again, do you think the penalties are actually in any way providing a disincentive for people to participate in this trafficking?
I appreciate it. I don't have the knowledge to judge whether penalties are going to deter or not deter.
Okay, I think this bill is a really critical piece of the puzzle in providing a backstop for the wildlife that's being trafficked, but I do think we need to engage in a conversation about current market value, how we're actually disincentivizing people from participating in this trafficking. Thank you very much, Madam Chair.
I want to thank the witness, Mr. Michael, for the testimony today and the members for their questions. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witness, and in fact, I think that they do and have made that clear that we're seeking additional information from the Fish and Wildlife Service, and we appreciate your cooperation in that regard in responding to that follow-up. And we will ask that you respond to those requests in writing. And while the clerk is resetting the table, I want to introduce the witnesses for our third panel. Mr. Michael, thank you for being here today. Colonel Roger Young, the Executive Director of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission from Tallahassee, Florida, is here with us today, as is Mr. Craig Hoover, the Executive Vice President of the Association of Zoos and Aquariums in Silver Spring, Maryland. Mr. Michael Shields, President of American Fishing Wire in Coatesville, Pennsylvania, has joined us, and Ms. Candace Hassenjaeger, did I say that correctly? Thank you. The director of the Utah Division of Water Resources in Salt Lake City has traveled across the country to join us today. Under committee rules, you must limit your oral statements to 5 minutes, but your entire statement will appear in the hearing record. To begin your testimony, please press the button on the microphone, and as you heard earlier, we use timing lights. When you begin, the light will turn green. When you have 1 minute remaining, the light will turn yellow. And at the end of 5 minutes, the light will turn red. And I will ask you to please complete your statement. I will also allow all witnesses to testify before the members begin their questioning. I now recognize Colonel Young for 5 minutes.
Good morning. Thank you, Chair Hagerman, Ranking Member Hoyle, and members of the Subcommittee on Waters, Wildlife, and Fisheries. Chair Hagerman, my name is Roger Young, and I'm the Executive Director of the Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission, the FWC, which is the state agency that manages fish and wildlife resources for the citizens of Florida. Thank you for the invitation to testify about the importance of H.R. 1676, the Making Swaps Efficient Act, which Congressman Donalds and Congressman Moskowitz introduced. The FWC thanks them for their bipartisan leadership on this important issue. Also, I want to thank Congressmen Webster and Soto, who both serve on the House of Natural Resources Committee, for all their efforts on behalf of the state of Florida. Florida is the third most populous state in the country, with 23 million residents and 143 million visitors to the state of Florida last year. Florida also has 12,133 square miles of water, 53,625 square miles of land, and 1,350 miles of coastline. Our beautiful state is home to some of the most diverse and unique wildlife in the world. It's an honor to lead an agency with more than 2,000 dedicated and passionate employees who are committed to improving wildlife conservation for this generation and for future generations to follow. While Florida's wildlife management and wildlife management across this country is very complex, my testimony today will focus on H.R. 1676 and why it closes the gap for state fish and wildlife agencies in achieving their conservation missions. This year, 45 states will submit their State Wildlife Action Plan, often referred to as a SWAP, to the United States Fish and Wildlife Service after months of working with stakeholders and partners on revisions. This begins the official review process where the SWAP is distributed to other states within the region for peer review with other state wildlife managers, where they analyze and evaluate the plan. Once their peers approve it, the plan is returned to the regional U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service office for approval before finally being submitted to the service headquarters for approval. 10 years ago, when Florida submitted our State Wildlife Action Plan to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, it was approved 18 months after it was submitted. In talking with other state fish and wildlife agencies, we found that we were not alone. In fact, for most states, it took 18 months or longer, in one case, up to 3 years, for the service to approve these swaps. FWC wants to help to try to improve this process. In fact, we were part of a group that worked with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and other state agencies to streamline the review process. We are confident that this process can be done in 6 months. Now, I am not here today to criticize the federal government. I'm here to advocate for accountability on the part of the federal government, which holds the states accountable for achieving the conservation actions outlined in our SWAP. I am here to promote H.R. 1676 because it solves a real problem for the states. H.R. 1676 is a simple bill. It would establish a 6-month deadline for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service to approve a state-prepared, peer-reviewed, and approved state wildlife action plan. If the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service does not approve a state wildlife action plan within 6 months, then it is deemed approved. This is a common-sense solution to an existing problem for states. This bill would bring certainty to an uncertain process and provide accountability for a process that the service has said they are committed to undertaking. It would allow the states to move quicker to implement important conservation management strategies and tactics and adjust current programs. That is why FWC and the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies, AFWA, and other conservation groups all support H.R. 1676. The FWC is here to be helpful. We appreciate the committee's attention to this important bill and encourage committee approval. Thank you again for the invitation and the opportunity to be here today.
Wonderful, thank you.
Good afternoon, Chair Hageman, Ranking Member Hoyle, and subcommittee members. It is a pleasure and an honor to testify before you in support of H.R. 3538, the Wildlife Confiscations Network Act. I'm Craig Hoover, and I'm the Executive Vice President of AZA, the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Wildlife trafficking is estimated to earn organized criminal networks up to $23 billion annually. The black market wreaks havoc on wildlife populations while financing criminal syndicates that threaten U.S. security interests and corrupt the rule of law. The illegal trade in live animals has created a domestic crisis for wildlife law enforcement at U.S. borders and major ports of entry across the nation. Across a recent 5-year period, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service saw 834 cases of live wildlife interdiction involving nearly 50,000 individual live animals, an average of nearly 30 per day, each requiring placement and critical care. Qualified facilities with experts in animal well-being are often called upon to provide immediate medical care and housing for confiscated wildlife. In October 2023, the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service and AZA launched a cooperative agreement to create the Wildlife Confiscations Network as a pilot program in Southern California. The network increases support for law enforcement by providing a single point of contact and coordinated system to ensure the care and welfare of confiscated live wildlife. The network's confiscations coordinator connects agents with vetted, high-quality animal care facilities capable of identifying species, advising on safe handling and short-term holding, and providing housing for long-term care. The network brings together zoos and aquariums, sanctuaries, rehabilitation centers, non-governmental organizations, and universities as key partners to provide quality care and management for confiscated wildlife. It allows us to move quickly, provides a large pool of animal care facilities to call upon, and offers opportunities to coordinate resource sharing so that no one facility is overwhelmed by a large number of confiscated animals. This collaborative approach reduces the burdens on law enforcement by relieving them of the heavy logistical challenges of finding placement. The efficacy of this program is now well established. Since its inception, the Wildlife Confiscations Network has assisted in over 135 wildlife trafficking cases and successfully placed over 4,600 animals into long-term care. While this pilot program is a clear success, our current cooperative agreement is time-limited, and the network lacks both the resources and direct congressional authority to expand beyond the Southern California region. The Wildlife Confiscations Network Act would codify this thriving program, expand the established success of the network across the country, and authorize dedicated operational resources to support law enforcement nationwide. The network provides essential capacity to these officers, empowering them to focus their efforts on their true mandate, interdicting illegal live wildlife and holding criminals accountable. The cases we support are shocking and heart-wrenching, but perhaps the best example of this insidious trade is the case of Baby J, a 5-month-old spider monkey who was tossed out of the window of a moving vehicle along the US-Mexico border in southern Texas. Trapped in a suitcase and abandoned by the roadside, Baby J was discovered by Customs and Border Protection and subsequently seized by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The network stepped in to facilitate Baby J's transportation to the Dallas Zoo for emergency care and secured his eventual placement for long-term care at Florida's Brevard Zoo, where he has been successfully integrated into their troop of spider monkeys. As this example illustrates, the Wildlife Confiscations Network Act is a nonpartisan initiative that every American can support. It is a common-sense step forward to provide humane care to victimized wildlife and provide critical support to law enforcement who strive every day to protect the American public from the dangers of transnational organized crime. With broad support from 75 stakeholder organizations and bipartisan support in Congress, there is no question that the Wildlife Confiscations Network Act is in our national interest. In closing, I wish to thank the subcommittee for your swift consideration of this important legislation and the co-chairs of the Congressional Zoo and Aquarium Caucus, Mr. Garbarino and Mr. Quigley, for their leadership as the original co-sponsors of this bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover. That was enlightening. Mr. Shields, please provide us with your 5 minutes of testimony.
Chair Hageman, Ranking Member Hoyle, and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to testify today in support of H.R. 3858. My name is Mike Shields, and I'm the president of American Fishing Wire, based in Coatesville, Pennsylvania. It's a family business, and I'm a second-generation owner and a proud member of the American Sport Fishing Association. At American Fishing Wire, we've been manufacturing sport fishing equipment for over 4 decades. We produce wire leaders, terminal tackle, and other products that help anglers connect with fish and with nature. I can say with confidence that our company and the sport fishing industry as a whole is deeply rooted in conservation. We know that without healthy fish populations and access to clean, fishable waters, our business doesn't exist. That's why we don't just support the federal excise tax on sport fishing equipment, we're proud to pay it. The Sport Fish Restoration and Boating Trust Fund traces its roots back to Dingell-Johnson Act of 1950, which created a dedicated source of federal funding for fish conservation and recreational fishing programs by placing an excise tax on fishing equipment. These funds are dedicated to a wide range of boating safety, infrastructure, and aquatic resource projects. The program represents one of the most effective conservation funding mechanisms in the world and is built on a strong partnership between anglers, boaters, manufacturers, and state and federal wildlife agencies. For every rod, reel, lure, spool of line, and many other categories of fishing equipment sold, a portion goes into the National Trust Fund, and then is distributed to the state fish and wildlife agencies to support aquatic habitat restoration, fish stocking, boating access improvements, public education programs, and more. Since the program's inception, over $12 billion has been invested directly into fish and wildlife conservation. And these dollars don't just fund conservation, they also fuel economic growth. Recreational fishing is a $230 billion industry in the United States, and it supports over 1 million American jobs. For a manufacturer like American Fishing Wire, we see firsthand how investing in healthy fisheries pays dividends, not just ecologically, but also economically. A few months ago, I had the privilege of participating in a Partner with a Payer event with the Pennsylvania Fish and Boat Commission. Organized by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service's Office of Conservation and Investment, these events are designed to connect companies like mine, those who pay into the excise tax program, with agencies who receive and implement those funds on the ground. It was a very powerful experience. We gave the agencies a tour of our factory and operations, and we discussed how we design and manufacture products that the anglers rely on. In addition, we traveled to Huntsdale Fish Hatchery in Pennsylvania, where I got to witness the restoration work funded in part by the taxes that we pay. We helped load trout onto the trucks and assisted stocking some of the local streams near our factory. It made the whole system feel tangible and made me even more committed to supporting it. Pennsylvania is a put-in, take-out fishery, and without the Sport Fish Restoration Fund, there would be no fish for anglers. In an age where many question where their tax dollars go, this is one tax that has a clear accountability, measurable impact, and a broad public support. The return on investment isn't just measured in fish populations. It's seen in children learning to fish for the first time, in improved water quality, in expanded access for anglers of all backgrounds, and in vibrant local economies built around healthy aquatic ecosystems. I want to express my sincere appreciation to Representatives Debbie Dingell and Rob Whitman for their leadership in introducing H.R. 3858. This bipartisan bill reauthorizes the Sport Fish Restoration and Boating Trust Fund and ensures that this critical source of conservation funding continues without interruption. Their commitment to conservation and to America's outdoor heritage is deeply appreciated by manufacturers like myself, by anglers, and by the outdoor recreational economy. In closing, I want to reiterate the success of the Sport Fish Restoration Program rests on a rare alignment of industry, government, and public interest. It works because manufacturers like American Fishing Wire are willing to contribute. It works because state agencies are trusted stewards of those contributions. And it works because Congress continues to provide the legislative support necessary to keep this partnership strong. On behalf of my company, my colleagues in the American Sport Fishing Association, and millions of anglers across the country, I urge you to support H.R. 3858 and ensure continued success in this essential program. Thank you again for the opportunity to appear before you, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Shields. I now recognize Ms. Hasenjager for 5 minutes.
Good morning, Chairman Hageman and Ranking Member Hoyle and members of the subcommittee. I'm Candace Hasenjager, and I'm the director at the Utah Division of Water Resources. I'm a native Utahn, an engineer. I've been there for about at Water Resources for about 18 years, and the last 3 years as director. In Utah, we always say you can't manage what you don't measure, so I really appreciate the opportunity to testify before you today on the benefits of H.R. 3857, Snow Water Supply Forecasting Reauthorization Act of 2025, and commend Congressman Hurd and Congressman Dingell for introducing this critical piece of legislation. Utah's water supply, like much of the West, is based on a snow-driven hydrology. Approximately 95% of our water supply comes from our snowpack. The snow falls in the mountains throughout the winter, and the spring conditions start to melt the snow. Our rivers will swell and fill the reservoirs that were designed to capture the runoff for later use. While this general process occurs every year, is highly and increasingly variable in terms of snow accumulation and the volume and timing of runoff. Accurate and timely snowpack data are essential for forecasting water supplies that support our communities, agriculture, and our ecosystems. Utah continues to grapple with significant water challenges, primarily driven by ongoing drought conditions, greater extremes in our water supply, and a growing population. In 2022, Utah experienced some of the worst water supply conditions of our lifetimes. Great Salt Lake reached record lows at the same time as the Colorado River was facing unprecedented challenges. These challenges are not only felt at the larger interstate scale, but also in Utah's local communities where water availability is a persistent challenge and shortages are routine. Utah is working diligently to find solutions that enhance the management of our watersheds and ensure a sustainable future for the region. While we've had a couple of good snow years, we know that the state is still in drought. In Utah, we are either in drought or we're preparing for the next one. HR 3857 would reauthorize the Bureau of Reclamation's Snow Water Supply Forecasting Program. This program provides critical funding to deploy and integrate new snow monitoring technologies, helping to make our water management decisions more robust in the face of weather extremes, wildfires, and other challenges. For example, the program supports the use of NASA-developed airborne snow observatories, or ASO technology, to measure the snowpack across the entire watershed, providing a high-resolution snowpack inventory. Utah has utilized this program for 2 pilot projects, and they have deployed ASO technology over key watersheds. These projects, located in the Colorado River Basin and the Great Salt Lake Basin, are producing accurate and detailed maps of key snow characteristics. And it's important to note that ASO complements the Central Natural Resource Conservation Service snow telemetry sites, also called SNOTEL, and emerges as a powerful and important tool in the snow measurement toolbox. These airborne surveys have provided a comprehensive picture of the snowpack, including low elevation and smaller tributary areas, which enables local water managers to fine-tune their operations, make existing infrastructure more efficient, which in turn makes us all a little bit more fiscally responsible. Our Utah projects have benefited from other Western ASO projects in California and Colorado. They have both utilized the program and have seen dramatic benefits from the improved measurement and forecasting tools, which reduces uncertainty and enhances runoff for all parties. Federal support for this program has been integral and enabling part of this effort. Reauthorization of the Bureau's program will help address an urgent need while drawing lessons learned during the program's initial term. Thank you for your time this morning, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you for that interesting testimony. I want to thank each of the witnesses for coming today and providing this valuable information. I will now recognize members for 5 minutes each of questioning, and I'm going to begin with myself. Colonel Young, in your testimony, you mentioned that the Association of Fish and Wildlife Agencies and the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service have together developed a streamlined review process for swaps. Can you describe how that process is envisioned to work and how Mr. Donald's bill supplements that process?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Great question. So yes, the state's agencies, the federal agencies, U.S. Fish and Wildlife, with assistance with AFA and other conservation entities, all work together and are focusing on how we can make this as efficient as possible. And what we've developed is a swap summary template. Okay. And what this is as these plans are developed in the regional review phase, which often takes many months, up to 42 months at sometimes, these are providing a review roadmap for that next level of review. So it highlights the 8 elements of the swaps that are required for passing. So this facilitates the speed and ease of review at that next level. Congressman Donald's bill will just simply help us be more efficient and effective in getting that. And this roadmap and that template that we have provided will help us get there.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Hoover, you may have heard the questioning that I had for the gentleman from the Fish and Wildlife Service. And what I'm trying to find out is how many organizations meet the definition of HR 3538 for a cooperative program with the Secretary for the care and well-being of these animals. I'm trying to find out how many organizations actually meet the definition in the bill.
Thank you, Chairwoman. I think the best way to look to the future with regard to potential implementation of this law is to look to the present. And what I would point out is that the current pilot project, which aligns very closely with the legislative language, currently involves zoos, aquariums, sanctuaries, universities, wildlife rehabilitation facilities, and other similar organizations. More than a third of the current approximately 40 partners in that effort are not accredited by the Association of Zoos and Aquariums. Some of them are accredited by other organizations, such as the Global Federation of Animal Sanctuaries. Others are not accredited at all. So I do think the legislation really requires a big tent because it is a very big problem. And frankly, we would welcome any facility that has the capacity to care for confiscated wildlife and the interest in doing so to join in that effort.
And that's really what I'm trying to get to. Would you agree that the service could accomplish these goals perhaps more efficiently and more effectively by partnering with multiple organizations rather than just a few?
I think the legislation affords that opportunity. Like I said, it describes an oversight entity, but in terms of the participating organizations, it is quite broad. And as I said, current practice reflects that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Ms. Hasenjager, in your testimony, you state that in Utah, we are either in drought or preparing for the next one. In Wyoming, we have the exact same situation, so I understand exactly what you're talking about. Can you tell us how this program and the emerging technologies identified in the 2021 report to Congress would sharpen our abilities to monitor and predict annual water conditions using snowpack information?
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, what it does is it really helps us to reduce uncertainty in our overall snow water supply, right? Because we were able to get a whole basin perspective. And then once we can estimate that volume, then we'll have more certainty in our forecast as well, more accurate forecasts.
Well, wonderful. While this program is administered by the Bureau of Reclamation, much of your testimony describes how the Utah Division of Water Resources has benefited from increased opportunities for snow mapping by airborne surveys. How has this program benefited not only federal water management, but also state, tribal, and local management?
Water is essential, thank you, Chairman. Water is essential to life for all of us and for all parts of our economy. So all water users benefit from a more accurate forecast and being able, and also having lead in to if we're gonna have a big year or a small year as far as runoff goes, and helps us better prepare for what may come.
Well, wonderful, and thank you for the work that you do in Utah. I know how important this information is for not only our reservoir operators, but for everyone in the state to know what kind of a year that we're going to have in relation to snowpack. The chair now recognizes Representative Elfreth for her 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to the panel for being here. Mr. Hoover, thank you. If you could share with the various AZA organizations that have already taken part in the pilot program, the gratitude for myself, and I'm sure I can speak for the whole committee, the public good that you are providing free of charge, I greatly appreciate. Can you speak for a moment first of all, it's my understanding that wildlife trafficking is certainly on the rise. The trend is going up, is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, and if we were not to move this bill, can you give us an appreciation for what would happen to the majority of those trafficked animals who were confiscated?
Thank you, Congresswoman. So if we don't have the capacity to care for live confiscated wildlife, wildlife law enforcement is faced with really a series of several bad options. They won't have access to qualified care. We are really pushing the envelope with our own capacity at this moment to provide that care. And those bad options include allowing the illegal trade to occur, euthanasia, so the individual animals are killed, returning the animals to the country of export, and attempting to care for the animals themselves. Again, all bad options. Each of these options undermines their efforts to combat wildlife trafficking. It negatively impacts the well-being of the individual animals involved. And the most likely of these options really is returning the animals to the country of export, where you could imagine what will happen next. And that is many will not survive the additional transport. And the likelihood is that those that do survive will be just entered right back into illegal trade, and this cycle will continue.
Thank you for that. And in your experience, what is the process for finding placements for confiscated animals, and who is currently bearing the burden of coordinating those placements?
The history, and I can speak to this because I actually started in wildlife law enforcement at the beginning of my career, is that individual law enforcement officials have their own personal lists of who they call, which means there's no coordinated effort. Individual facilities, some facilities bear most of the burden, particularly those that are closest to major ports of entry or the border, and there's just this overwhelm. An excellent example of that is the Gladys Porter Zoo in Brownsville, Texas, which is currently caring for 17 confiscated spider monkeys at tremendous individual cost to that facility. We need a network so that we can spread the resources around so that no individual facility is overwhelmed, and so that we can help law enforcement get back to doing what they need to be doing, and that is stopping wildlife traffickers.
And I have a great appreciation, having worked at the National Aquarium, you have the informal network through AZA right now, but I think this bill presents the opportunity for the federal government to step up in its own role in helping coordinate that network as well and the facilitation of placements. And then last question, Mr. Hoover, I know doing this public service is of financial burden to your membership. Can you speak a little to the committee about how many resources, what do the resources look like that you're putting into this network?
Yeah, perhaps, thank you for that question. Perhaps the best way to speak to that is to talk about a few individual cases. This is not a situation where there is reimbursement for this activity. It's work that we do because we are passionate about wildlife. We are passionate about wildlife confiscation or conservation, and we are passionate about taking care of individual animals that are at risk. And the cost of providing emergency care and lifetime care are enormous. Just two examples. One of our partners in California is currently caring for a tiger cub seized at the U.S.-Mexico border. Lifetime care for that animal is estimated to be about $1.2 million.
Oh my gosh.
The lifetime care of a single black-handed spider monkey, which can live for 30 years, is estimated to be approximately $1.1 million. These are costs that our members and our partners take on because we believe it is the right thing to do, but it is not sustainable. And so the Wildlife Confiscations Network Act would help support the important work on behalf of our government partners. Thank you.
I really appreciate that context. And again, I want to thank your members. The public good you are performing, you are educational conservation organizations, and you're also providing this really essential public good for the rest of the nation. We appreciate it, and that's why I'm a proud supporter of this bill. And I'll yield back my time, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. Ezell for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. My district, which is on the Mississippi Gulf Coast, we live and breathe recreational fishing. In a time where almost all of America's seafood is being imported, we must defend our domestic supply. H.R. 3858, the Sport Fish Restoration, Recreational Boating, Safety, and Wildlife Restoration Act of 2025, that's a mouthful, reauthorized the original Sport Fish Restoration and Boating Trust Fund through 2031 and increases funding based on inflation, which helps account for the burden that is placed on the American fishermen. These funds would tackle issues such as invasive aquatic species, habitat restoration, helping fishers throughout the United States have sufficient access to domestic supply, and helping to offset the burden placed on them because of imported seafood. Mr. Shields, can you describe the projects, these funds, that have been impactful along the Mississippi Gulf Coast?
Thank you, Congressman. I apologize respectfully, but I'm more knowledgeable in the funding that goes into fisheries management and to conservation resources, and less knowledgeable about specifically about that question. I'd be happy to research that and get you an answer with working closely with my colleagues.
Expand on it to some of the other areas that you are familiar with?
Well, sure, yes. We all know that, healthy fisheries and public access really, they don't just happen, right? They require significant funding and resources, and, if we aren't going to do it as an industry, then it's just not going to happen on its own. So I think it's really important that this bill serves a very important service, and there's also a business benefit to it because there's a strong return on the investment in everybody that contributes towards it.
Thank you. How have the various marine fisheries commissions benefited sportsmen and women across the country?
I'm sorry.
How's it benefit? How has the various marine fisheries commissions benefited sportsmen and or women, men and women across the country? And can you describe the way these commissions assist both commercial fishing interests and recreational anglers?
Sure, well, what it does primarily is it promotes, healthy fisheries, and it increases fishing habitats. So without fish, we don't have a market or an industry for those people to make a living.
Right.
So it directly impacts them in that way.
What message would you like to convey to the members of Congress about the urgency of passing this legislation?
I would like to just point out the significance of this bill. It really isn't so much of a tax. I view it more of as a conservation trust. The money is collected and goes back into the industry. It's a sustainable initiative, and it helps to grow the business and grow and preserve the best interests of everybody involved.
Thank you. Madam Chair, I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Magaziner for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you to the chair and ranking member and to all of our expert witnesses for being here today. I come from Rhode Island, where recreational fishing, in addition to commercial, is a major driver of our economy. Rhode Islanders and our guests can catch striped bass, black sea bass, blackfish, flounder, even tuna off the coast of Rhode Island. Over 50,000 Rhode Islanders have recreational fishing licenses. The recreational fishing industry generates nearly $500 million of economic activity in our state. And last year, we welcomed almost 4 million, we welcomed millions of people to our state for over 4 million individual fishing trips in Rhode Island. What I hear from the recreational fishing industry in our state is that Dingell Johnson is invaluable in investing millions of dollars a year in Rhode Island for habitat restoration, research, outreach, and assorted industry support. Maintaining hundreds of fishing spots across the state, coastal restoration work to improve recreational access and protect against erosion, programs to help train kids and seniors on others on how to fish responsibly. So I'm proud to support Representative Dingell's work to reauthorize this program, and I thank her for her longtime leadership on sportsmen's issues and habitat conservation. But while we support the reauthorization of this bill, we also have to ensure that U.S. Fish and Wildlife has the staffing and resources needed to support the recreational fishing industry. And that's something that I'm concerned about in light of the purging of federal employees at U.S. Fish and Wildlife, among other agencies. In addition, we have before us a bill today on Pittman-Robertson funding. This invests funds in sportsmen who hunt white-tailed deer, small game, and waterfowl in my state for land acquisition, habitat restoration, and hunters education. This bill would require Fish and Wildlife to approve state plans to use these funds within 180 days. I agree that we need to cut down on administrative delays, but again, we have to make sure that Fish and Wildlife has the staff that it needs to actually review these plans and do the work. Setting artificial deadlines without making sure that the staffing is in place to deliver on those deadlines is a self-defeating exercise. So I'll ask all of our witnesses, and perhaps we can start with Colonel Young. Both Dingell Johnson and Pittman-Robertson grants are administered by U.S. Fish and Wildlife. Since the start of this year, Fish and Wildlife has seen hundreds of employees fired or given these accelerated retirement options, and freezes have been placed on federal grants. Does this kind of disruption at Fish and Wildlife make state-level habitat restoration work easier or harder?
Thank you for your question. It's a definitely appropriate one for the time. So, conservation doesn't happen without partnerships across the board, across the country, especially with, dealing with, the funds that go into supporting it. And this is why we feel that Donald's Bill 1676 will make that more efficient. That's why we worked with our regional partners from the service to help come up with that template and that roadmap to help facilitate things like when it comes to approving the State Wildlife Action Plan. Because we all know it's more cost-effective to try to identify species of greatest concern, whichever that is, and try to do preventative measures beforehand than it's more cost-effective to do that than to try to recover a species after it's gone too far. So taking these initiatives and conservation measures up front, working with our partners early on will help get that done.
Well, I appreciate that collaborative approach, and I hope that those Fish and Wildlife Regional staff members who you worked with and have been working with will be able to keep their jobs with the carnage that we're seeing in our federal agencies. And just to be clear, it's not just what's already occurred, but in the president's budget for next year, he's proposing a 32% cut to the Fish and Wildlife Service. That's more than $500 million, including a 31% cut from the Fish and Aquatic Conservation Program and a 22% cut from the National Wildlife Refuges, among many others. So I'll give someone else a chance in the few seconds that I have left, perhaps Mr. Shields. What will the impact be of these sorts of cuts if they're allowed to go through?
Well, I don't really know the full impact. Obviously, it will have an impact, but there's decades of work that's been done in these programs, and it is concerning that some of that work could be lost. But I don't really have a specific answer for you. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes Mr. LaMalfa for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Hassenegger, appreciate your testimony and your presence and the interest in applying better technology on our snow forecast, runoff forecast, et cetera. It's a big deal in California where I'm from as well. And I've had a lot of frustration over that in the last several years, say from 2020 to 2022, and even more currently. We've had an amazing amount of snowpack and rain, last 3 years, yet the allocation of water supply, most specifically to agriculture, seems to wane. We have full lakes, and some areas of the state at best are receiving 50 or 55% of their, what used to be their normal allocation in agriculture. It seems to be that they're trying to make that the new normal. 100 equals 50 or 55, whether you're talking the state project or the federal project there. So just a few years ago, they had overestimated the snowpack amount and released water subsequently to tailor that, since they have to maintain flood control levels in the lakes per Army Corps of Engineers, and then made other commitments. And at the end of the day, we overestimated, so now people run short. And it's agriculture that always gets hit first. So can you provide any additional insight on how SNOFO and these technologies would be helpful to apply back home in California? Yet, this year, Lake Oroville, which I can just see right out my front window, did reach fullness within 8 inches of what they call the top. Lake Shasta, farther north in my district, got within just a few feet. I think, I remember off the top of my head, they were another 150,000 acre feet, I think, would have filled it. But even then, the water managers are nervous about letting the lakes fill all the way. Now, in my view, with some level of humor, I like to see every lake be an infinity pool, because that means you've saved every drop of water you can, because there's someone there that's going to need it, right? So, but they're concerned that, well, we got to leave that space there in case a storm comes along in May or June, which they don't, and makes all the snowpack melt too fast, and they have to let too much water out. So, could you comment on how this technology would be additionally helpful in California on our big lakes there? And does that touch in any way the FIRO technology, which is forecast informed? Is that something you're parallel with?
Thank you, Congressman. I like the idea of an affinity pool. That sounds pretty nice. By implementing these programs and this ASO technology, we're able to get the basin scale amount of snow. So the whole volume And this information can inform and optimize our flood control operations, so better inform how much water is coming in so we know how much to release at our federal facilities, provide short and long-term water management decisions. It helps us with environmental protection, drought mitigation, and resiliency, and really the dissemination of results that really benefit our water users by knowing what to plan for and help us get to better decision-making more quickly. So I think there's a lot of promise for this technology to be implemented more widespread.
Yeah, I was frustrated this year that Lake Shasta, for example, they were releasing about 62,000 CFS, which those numbers might be a complete different world from what you're compared to on Colorado River and the size of the projects you have there with Lake Mead and Lake Powell. But that's a lot of water to be letting down the stream based on, some level of fear of the snowpacks coming down all of a sudden into the lake. But it was actually flooding out roadways in one of my counties and such. So, and yet the lake, I guess I'm a complainer, but until the lake is completely full, it means it's missed opportunity. And with these ways to forecast, whether it's FIRO, weather forecast-informed reservoir operations is what FIRO is, and what you're talking about with being able to better estimate snowpack, we could be saving more water. And you've had tough conditions on the Colorado there with, I don't know when the last time Lake Mead was actually full or Lake Powell was actually full, and I'm rooting for you every day, on that. Has it been helpful to have water not wasted from releases on those, on the Colorado?
Yes, Congressman. By having this improved forecast, we are seeing better information as far as health and human safety when we're talking about flood control at reservoirs, as well as being able to inform our conservation programs. The programs in Utah are fairly new, but we are seeing good data come out of them.
Yeah, okay, well, and bottom line, I have to yield back here, but do you recommend we in California would take a strong look and perhaps implement these to the full degree we could be?
Yes, that's what we're looking for in Utah too. Yeah.
Yep, okay. Thank you, Madam Chairman, I yield back.
Thank you, and the chair now recognizes Ms. Rivas for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you, Madam Chair, for recognizing me. My questions will be for Mr. Miko, and I plan on submitting my questions for the record after this hearing. The Trump administration is proposing a 32% cut to the Department of Interior, which equates to $539 million worth of cuts to the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. This includes a $38.9 million cut to the Fish and Wildlife Service's Ecological Services, which implements the Endangered Species Act, a $3.2 million cut to carry out the Partners for Fish and Wildlife and Coastal Programs, which foster on-the-ground collaborations to restore, protect, and enhance habitats for federal priority trust species. $115.8 million cut to the National Wildlife Refuge System, $34.7 million cut to conservation and enforcement efforts that support law enforcement officers who investigate wildlife trafficking, zeroing out specific programs such as the National Wildlife Refuge Fund, Cooperative Endangered Species Fund, and state and tribal wildlife grants. Zeroing out the state and tribal wildlife grants will have a devastating impact to my constituents in California. California uses the state and tribal wildlife grant to develop and implement its state wildlife action plan. My home state annually receives $2 and $3 million a year from the State Wildlife Grant Fund to help identify wildlife in need of conservation and prescribe actions to conserve these species. California has more species than any other state and the largest number of species that are found nowhere else in the world. We have 1,045 unique species of animals and 6,500 species of plants. This State Wildlife Grant Fund makes sure that millions of Californians and our visitors can enjoy our state's beautiful and diverse natural environments. More importantly, it ensures stable biodiversity to build our resiliency to mitigate the impacts of climate change. The combination of bills like H.R. 1676, the Trump staff firings and budget cuts to the entire Department of Interior is a recipe for disaster. I have concerns about how this combination will prioritize polluters' profits over the well-being of our communities and ecosystems. Thank you, and I yield back.
Thank you. The chair now recognizes the ranking member for 5 minutes of questions.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Hoover, first of all, you employ an Oregonian who grew up in my district. She has spent her career working on the protection and preservation of wildlife, so excellent hire. With that, what can't the network do now because it's operating as a pilot program?
Thank you, Ranking Member Hoyle, and I agree with your assessment of that particular staff person. Thank you for that acknowledgement. The wildlife trafficking is a national problem in the United States. It's also a global problem. The current pilot is providing critical support to Southern California, and we are also taking calls and helping where we can elsewhere in the country, but we do not have the capacity to fully support the large volumes of live wildlife confiscations happening in Dallas and in Miami and in New York and in Chicago. These are all major hubs for illegally traded wildlife. The Wildlife Confiscations Network Act would help to remedy these gaps by supporting a nationwide effort to combat wildlife trafficking and provide critical care for confiscated live wildlife. And I would also say it could provide a global model because this is a global crisis. And so the opportunity to demonstrate success here in the United States could be a model for other countries as well. Thank you.
So I think the other thing is I'd like for you to expand on what you talked about the risk posed to the American public when wildlife is smuggled across the border, and also work in what would happen if these facilities were not able or were unwilling to take these animals.
Yeah, the risks posed by wildlife trafficking are great. One of the most significant threats of the illegal wildlife trade is the potential spread of zoonotic disease to people, to pets, and to the livestock industry. Because illegal trade avoids quarantine requirements, veterinary health authorizations, and other safeguards, illegally traded wildlife has the potential to really wreak havoc on American health and food security. In addition, in many cases, these are dangerous animals. Primates and big cats traded as babies grow up and become dangerous to even knowledgeable owners. Venomous snakes smuggled through the mail are a threat not only to their potential recipient, but also to the unsuspecting Customs and Border Protection officer who may unwittingly open what was labeled kids' toys. Lastly, wildlife trafficking is just that. It's trafficking of a commodity for a profit with clear ties to trafficking to other commodities such as guns, drugs, and even people. Taken as a whole, these activities undermine good governance, they destabilize governments, and they pose a threat to people both at home and abroad. The less we are able to be partners to support wildlife law enforcement, the more these threats are exacerbated.
Thank you, Mr. Hoover. And Mr. Shields, briefly, my district, sports fishing is a way of life. I live across the street from a river with great fishing and is a critical part of our economy. The industry supports over 2,000 jobs and $300 million to Oregon's economy. And the sports fish restoration program is a common sense way to make sure that businesses that make up this industry can continue to thrive. Can you explain how the sports fish restoration program has helped companies like American Fishing Wire and the fishing tackle industry?
Yes, thank you for your question. Well, it goes back to the common sense management, and it's like what I mentioned earlier, healthy fisheries and conservation efforts, they just don't happen on their own, right? So it requires a lot of resources. It requires a lot of work and help, and as an industry, if we don't do it, I don't know who would do it, So there's a direct benefit for companies like American Fishing Wire, like our company, because we invest in the fund, we collect the taxes, we pay the taxes, And that comes back in terms of, fisheries management. There are more fish, there's more fish, there's more access to the fish. It's a sustainable conservation model. So it works very well in that regard.
Thank you very much, and I yield back.
The chair now recognizes Mr. Soto for 5 minutes of questioning.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. Director Young, welcome to Washington. As you know, our state, tourism, recreation, wildlife, all really important parts of the work that we get to do together with the FWC. We have a bipartisan red snapper bill that is going to try to open up the season a little bit on the Atlantic. It was one day last year to the disappointment of many. How important is that bill, and then NOAA funding to make sure we get the science right?
Thank you, Congressman Soto. It is not a day goes by we don't hear about red snapper in some form or fashion in the state of Florida. So
You and me both.
yes, sir. As we have done on the Gulf side of the state of Florida, with state management, we have allotted for 126 days this past season to allow anglers and their families to get out and enjoy that resource. On the Atlantic side, this year, only 2 days. Last year was just 1 day for the Atlantic's red snapper fishery. So after the Amendment 59 has come out, we were pleased to see that there are not going to be any closures this year coming up, but still concerned. We still feel like the data that the NOAA has is flawed, and we're looking for state management at some point when it's right. So we look forward to having those conversations moving forward. We look forward to the day where we can expand our exempted fishing permits in the Atlantic to help the quota, so we can allow the families and visitors and residents in the state of Florida to have more access to our Atlantic fisheries, red snapper fishery.
Well, we appreciate that. I also want to talk about birds, right? We have bald eagles in Central Florida and ospreys, limpkins, Osceola turkeys that people come from all over the country to help hunt. The snail kite is one of the protected birds that we have in the Kissimmee Channel Lakes, an area that is near and dear to me in our district. How's the snail kite population been going lately?
So I don't have any updates on the snail kite population at this time. I can certainly get back to you on that and give you the latest and greatest update on how the snail kite population is doing.
Then manatees. We had a rough patch a few years ago. The federal government worked together with the state government to avoid further unusual mortality events where you have massive deaths of manatees. How do you feel the manatee population is rebounding and the Indian River Lagoon restoration is going?
Yeah, so we're very pleased with the status of the manatee in the Indian River Lagoon. I know that we had record low mortalities 2 years ago in the state of Florida, which is outstanding. We'd love to see those numbers low. And we were working hard with our partners, with the federal partners on that end. I know alongside the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, we were able to put an end to the declaration of the unusual mortality event where we were feeding manatees for a period of time because it just didn't need it anymore because of the hard work by our conservationists in the area. So pleased to report things are looking better.
Sure, and I got to work on that waiver with then Secretary Holland. Obviously, SeaWorld, very big part of it. We're proud to have them in the district. And, these manatees, snail kites, and others, they're signs of a greater environmental situation, right? And so I think as we talk to folks about the importance of recreation, of conservation, that these species, it's not just for them. We're doing it for the whole ecosystem so Floridians can enjoy it. Wildlife corridors, a successful program that we need to continue to work on. We had hundreds of millions of dollars go through the American Rescue Plan to help fund it, along with then President Biden and then Governor DeSantis. How's it going with the status of wildlife corridors now? I know that very big for recreation, for protecting species, for our water supply. How do you feel that's going?
Again, progress is, and thanks for the question. It's an excellent one. Florida Wildlife Corridor is something that's very important to Florida. It's very important to the constituents, and we're doing all we can to support that. We feel like there's been gains in that. We were able to add, and I don't have the exact number of acreage to the corridor. And I say we, it's not just FWC, we're talking partners across the state of Florida, different landscape conservation across the state. We're all partners working together And that's what truly it is all about. And again, I said it earlier, conservation is about partnerships, and the Florida Wildlife Corridor is a good example of that success.
Well, I want to encourage you to continue to work on environmental easements. Some of our ranchers are some of our greatest conservationists. It's a low-impact use of the land while still being able to preserve a lot of this land for both wildlife, for water, and to continue our food supply, while preventing their grandkids to go condo and paving over the rest of Florida. So I'm committed to you to work with you on continuing those key programs in Washington. Welcome.
Appreciate your support. Thank you.
Thank you, and I want to thank the witnesses for your valuable testimony and the members for your participation and your questions today. The members of the committee may have some additional questions for the witnesses, and we will ask that you please respond to those in writing if you receive them. Under Committee Rule 3, members of the committee must submit such questions to the subcommittee clerk by 5 p.m. Eastern on Friday, June 27th. The hearing record will be held open for 10 business days for your responses. If there is no further business, without objection, the subcommittee stands adjourned.